So we begin the lasting process with the last, of course, and a lasting board. In this case, since we're creating a prototype, we'll be using chipboard as a lasting board or an insole. But usually we use Texan board or vegetable tanned leather. This lasting board gets held in place with a few nails. So you want to put a nail at the rear of the last, sort of in the center of the heel, and you want to place another nail at the toe of the last. Right? And then we're going to place a nail right in the middle. Just be sure to be aware of where the seam is in your last. You know, the seam for the hinge. Make sure that your nail isn't going in between those two parts. Once we have the nails in, you only want to hammer the nails in a few millimeters, just enough so that you can't pull it out with your hand. You want to fold those nails over. At this point, I've placed the upper onto the last, and as you can see, I am matching the bottom of the lasting allowance to the bottom of the heel, and making sure that the center line of the pattern is on the center line of the last. As I do so, I stretch the toe or the vamp, right? And what I'm doing is I'm pulling it over the feather edge so that the lasting allowance mark that we created falls at the feather edge. You may have to rotate your nail to get it out of the way. But I'm going to hold that there with my thumb. I'm going to use a nail. And I'm going to place that nail about 5 millimeters from the edge and hammer it into place. Right? And you may hit your finger. That is just part of it, unfortunately. Right? And now you can see how taut the pattern is. Now that you have your first nail and your lasting at the toe, you can slide the heel down to the lasting allowance mark. Right? And what that will do, that will increase the tension on the upper. Lasting is all about tension and pulling the upper in the right places so that it fits very closely to the last. As you can see, I've placed a couple pins to hold my strap in place. I didn't bother putting a buckle on this prototype, but when you're when you're lasting, you want to make sure that your shoe is laced or buckled or strapped if that is part of your design. So in the lasting process, you want to use lasting pliers if you have them. And the idea is that you pull the edge, or you grab the edge of the fabric, felt in this case, and you pull it until your lasting mark is at the feather edge. And then you hold that in place with a nail. Right? And again, you only want to hammer the nail until it's in a few millimeters so that you can't pull it out with your finger. Right? And we're also going to be working about 5 millimeters from the edge of the feather edge. So the way these pliers work is you sort of use the hammer part of the pliers as a fulcrum, right? So you grab, you stretch, and then you hammer it in place. As you're lasting, you want to work from side to side and continue to turn the last over and check to make sure that your upper is still on the center line. You don't want it to be twisted or pulled more to one side than the other. And if that does happen, you can just turn it over and stretch it in the opposite direction. And feel free to remove nails to adjust things as necessary. Okay, so now that we have our toe, the medial side, the lateral side, and the heel lasted, we can now move on to applying the glue. As you can see here, I have the material very taut around that feather edge up until where the nails are, and beyond the nails towards the I guess the inside of the last, you can see that's where all the pleats are. And that's exactly what you want. You don't want any pleats to be on that feather edge because it's going to show up when you complete the shoe. So in the toe, I had many nails to sort of maintain that shape and prevent any pleats from happening. But on the sides, there aren't as many nails just because I don't need them. There's no pleats there. Now in the rear, I have 2 layers of material. Both of those layers need to be lasted, of course. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a second. We've now reached a point where it's time to apply the glue to the upper and the lasting board. We'll be using a contact cement. This is a more eco-friendly version than the typical contact cement, which is really smelly. We're going to be using these for our prototypes. And the idea is to apply the glue to the lasting board as well as the underside of the upper, right? The sort of pleated area at the toe. Once you apply the glue to these areas, you have to give it time to tack up, right? Which it may take maybe 5 to 7 minutes to do so. You can sort of speed this process up with a hair dryer or a heat gun, but preferably a hair dryer because a heat gun might get a little too hot. And then once those 2 surfaces have tacked up, then you can stick them together. We have these little brushes, the little red plastic brush that I'm using. You all will be supplied with a brush and this glue so that you can proceed to lasting your uppers. So what I'm doing here is I'm applying that glue to the lasting board, and then I will do the same to the underside of the felt. You should be pretty liberal with the amount of glue you use on felt because felt tends to absorb the glue. You may find yourself having to do a couple coats of this glue onto the felt so that it can stick to the lasting board once you press the 2 together. Here you can see me using a hair dryer to sort of decrease the curing time of the glue. Now that the glue has set or tacked up, you can see me using my lasting pliers to stretch the material and press it down onto the lasting board. This sort of initiates the bond between the 2 surfaces, and then the hammering sort of, I guess, activates the glue and makes the bond really strong. So I'm just going to work my way around until the 2 surfaces are totally in contact with each other. Here is a close-up of my technique of lasting the pleats at the toe. So you want to grab those pleats, and as you grab them, you're twisting them and pressing them down onto the lasting board, right? And what that does, it sort of stretches the pleats and makes them smaller. And then you use the hammer of your lasting pliers to sort of press everything down. Moving on to the heel. So the heel is interesting because I have 2 layers of material here. So I'm gonna last the first layer and have that layer stick to the lasting board, right? And I'm using my pliers and the hammer to make sure those surfaces are totally in contact with each other. And then I move on to the second layer, and I press that second layer onto the first layer. I'm using the sort of claw of my hammer to get in between those nails, and then I also stretch the material with my lasting pliers. So it's sort of this dance of tools where you're going back and forth just doing whatever is necessary to get everything lasted and flat. Now that the glue has set, all of your lasting is done, you can now remove the nails. You're going to do that with your lasting pliers. There's somewhat of a technique here. If you can't just pull the nails out, then you can sort of use your lasting pliers or use the leverage of your lasting pliers to help you remove those nails. So you do that by grabbing the nails with the pliers sideways, and you use the hammer part of the nail as sort of a fulcrum. And you can see me do that there. When removing the nails, don't forget to remove the 3 nails in the center of your lasting board. You will not be able to remove the shoe from the last without removing these nails. Also, you can see me using the hammer to sort of flatten everything out. You can even use the handle of the hammer to do the same. Now that all the nails have been removed, we can now proceed to removing the last from the shoe. Here you can see me removing the 2 pins that I had holding the buckle in place. You're going to want to unlace the shoes when you proceed to cracking the last. Okay, it takes a little muscle, but there it goes. The last is cracked, and there is your lasted mule. Of course, you have to attach some sort of sole to this, but for the purposes of this assignment, this is complete.